how are you thinking about building resilience in your organization, and how do you how are you making kind of your organization as much recession proof as possible? As a leader, how do you think, what do you think research can do to make sure that their impact is felt, especially as companies are trying to cut down their costs?
Yeah, that's a great question. I definitely won't pretend that I have all the answers, because unfortunately my team also got impacted in our round of layoffs. Um, Equally, I think having had kind of the crazy career ride that I had along the way, you heard the word acquisition twice, been part of many reorgs. So I think change is like constantly happening within tech. And I think some of that just experience already helped build my own resilience towards change and being able to think about change management. Now, when I think about that as a leader and trying to get my team through something like that, I'm still a big believer that like psychological safety and people really do come first. I just remember when things like that happened at Capital One or even at Google, and we were either going through reorgs or layoffs, that people can often kind of check out. And once that happens, like forget impact, forget like strategic anything, you kind of have a bigger problem. So I think that was pretty much my top focus, is in those early stages, really trying to be there for the team, understand and give them the time they needed to process. But also, I think the next thing that's super helpful for people is once there's change, people need something new to anchor on. So I did want a fast follow of take the time to process, but we're also going to try to get out of this limbo state as quick as possible. Not that you're thrusted back into the work, but that you do have something to go to when you're feeling ready to be productive again. And so I think that worked pretty well for my team. I was very impressed with how quickly we pivoted. And that's a little bit more also on the individual level. And then when it comes to demonstrating value, we kind of went back to the drawing board and looked at everything that's happening across our org. Where are the areas that we really want to lean into? What do we have to give up? Because it wasn't like the areas where we lost people are the least important, and the areas where people are around are the most important. We had to reshuffle and rethink everything. So I would say those are like two critical parts, is realigning to importance and figuring out what is the most important thing to focus on. Luckily, we, I think, have established ourselves enough within the company to where there is more demand than we can kind of like support. So one of the things that I wanted to maybe even be like more radical about is shifting away from tactical work to more strategic work. And I know every company and every person is kind of in a different stage with that, but I think sometimes research is still in a place where the intuitive thing for cross-functional partners is like, oh, I'm going to launch something. Let's like validate it. Let's run a quick usability study. Let's like make sure that we can get a few people through a pilot so that they can feel good about the launch. To me, kind of assessing where we're at, I didn't want a bulk of our time to go there. So I think something that I just intuitively tried to do is look across the company like portfolio and strategy. And this is at any role and job that I've done, not just at Twilio, and kind of think top down, looking at the highest level objective that we set for the company. Do I agree with that? Does that make sense based on everything I've heard from users? Yes? Okay, let's go down another level. Like now at the product level, do I think that the roadmap that we currently have set kind of gets us to the goal? And I think sometimes like those answers are difficult to fully have confidence in, but I think if you're unsure, like there's a 50-50 chance, or actually I'm not fully convinced, because I keep hearing this other thing in interviews or from users that this problem is actually much more severe, or this is not actually going to solve whatever we're working towards. That's usually how I'm asking my team to kind of heat seek and really spot opportunities, because it doesn't help the team if we're just all being agreeable. Like if there's great momentum and we're marching in the right direction, wonderful. Like we might do lightweight things to support that direction here or there. But if there's already clarity on what we're doing, what we're building, then like, let's let that team run. I think the strong moments of where we should focus are moments of almost intervention, or where there's not clarity. Like, can we come in and provide structure or a framework or a view of our users that really helps the team get that clarity, get confidence, and like, this is the right thing to do, or actually, we're patching the small holes, but there's a big hole at the bottom of the bucket, and we all need to rush to that instead. And so I think that's how I kind of approach figuring out where we should spend our time across the team, and then also for individuals. You have to know which battles to fight. And I have fought some battles that I did not win, some of which I regret, others that I do not. I think over time you kind of gauge that better, and know what kind of conversations and questions to have up front. So sometimes that will be a question that I will pose to a product director or even VP of, we have these priorities, how locked are they? Can we work ahead? And if we notice some things, can we deviate from this roadmap in Q3, Q4? Or are we locked for the year? Does it make sense to push to 2024? Because sometimes we're in situations where the tactical work does matter, or you do need to validate a huge launch. And it's not that I'm being, radical on that front and just saying, no tactical work. I think it just, let's be deliberate about when we kind of choose that path. And then from there, I think, going to the cross-functional partners early and often, and trying to build those relationships and that rapport. And then I would say, like, I can probably talk about an example where I had a recommendation to block a certain launch because I didn't proceed, and instead, thought we should do something different. And I thought that was a conversation still worth having. But by the time we got around to those findings, it was like, no, Engine's halfway through building this. Like it's being, launched. But the small win in that was, I want to say, a month after it was launched, looking at the launch metrics, they decided to kind of pull back and ramp down the experiment, because it turns out our findings were accurate and it wasn't going to be a feature that moved the needle. So those types of things I see as wins, because again, like if you're in a kind of embedded model and you're with the organization for a period of time, that kind of teaches the team too that, like, hey, research did warn us about this. It didn't work out. Maybe next time they're a little bit more receptive, or you can bring us in sooner, so we're not, kicking off a study when we're halfway through building something. So all of these, I think, are learning moments. I would say a lot of it is just like gauging the appetite and the organizational readiness to pivot early and often, and checking in on that frequently. And then from there, being bold if you can be. Like, I know some people are still in situations where it's like a little bit more top down, or very like product or eng led. But I've, I guess, had the luck of being able to like be bold, talk to those leaders, and get a little bit of buy-in, and get some small wins, and then say, okay, like if this, then that, can we agree ahead of time that we're willing to at least consider other direction? Because sometimes the answer is no, and then we don't need to pursue it.
Right.
I would say sometimes you have to trust your gut too, because sometimes they will say it's locked and you are committed to those plans for the year. But I've had hunches before where it's like, this is still going to come back to bite us. So we should lay the foundation. And boom, a year later, the product strategy pivots and we have the answers. So like, use your judgment. When you're early into building those relationships, sometimes the small and fast wins. I think sometimes when one of the scenarios you had mentioned, there was like a PM that was pushing for a certain direction. I think we had evidence that it was the right thing to do, but there was another org that kind of had some dependencies and they were pushing against it. And so this is one of the moments where we decided, okay, let's run another study that we feel would provide enough evidence that this path is actually better. And then the PM asked me, can you actually join the meeting and advocate, because you're going to be able to articulate this better than I would. And I think those like small wins of being able to get that feature pushed through, even though it was like trivial in the grand scheme of things, built that rapport with that PM in ways that we then were able to tackle much bigger projects, because again, that trust is there. They've seen kind of how that can help. So I would say that is one thing to do on a more tactical level, is like get a small
finding allies for small.
Find allies. Okay. Exactly. When it comes to actually communication and how we present findings, I think one of the biggest things I see definitely in junior employees, and then across the board, I think we just really have a hard time, is with research, you can often learn many, many, many things because you're doing these 30-minute, 1 hour, sometimes 90-minute sessions, or you have large quantitative sets. And so I often find people want to share everything that they've learned. And I think that is really, really difficult for any audience to really absorb and then have direction from. So I'm a big fan of being very prescriptive and being very concise with the number of points you're trying to get across. So for me, if we had a presentation that pretty much anchored on 2 or 3 findings with evidence plus a recommendation, maybe even go as far as to say, and we've already worked with the designer to mock up how it could work or how it could look, kind of landing it at that fidelity is much more likely for that idea to get adopted. And at the end of the day, that's impact, right? I mean, you can like tell this amazing story, but if people don't actually know, like a lot of times I think research reports are always met with, that was super interesting, or thank you. And then we leave it at that. And I don't want to leave it at that. I want to show like, what are the paths forward? I've gone as far as like even mapping insights, if it is a little bit more foundational, to specific pillars, PMs, metrics, like to really show this is how we should take the next steps. And I think that has been pretty helpful to kind of outline that in more detail.
If you were to kind of give one big takeaway from this conversation that our audience should leave with, what would that takeaway be?
Great question. I would say probably trying to anchor yourself in understanding other people's motives, intentions, what drives them. I think it changes the way you're able to go deep with customers, with your stakeholders, like the audience you're presenting to. If you understand that and can kind of tailor the way you show up to resonate with them on things they care about, because I think a lot of times we just get so caught up in, I want to tell you what I think you should do, or kind of coming with our own agenda rather than, looking at that audience of who we're trying to communicate with, and then speak to them in a way that resonates, I think has been super, super helpful and impactful across, again, any relationship.
Great career advice, great research advice, and great life advice.